CYC is a free channel that presents the Word of God for everyone. Your support will help us to continue the mission. Visit our website, cycnow.com. Even $1 will make a difference.
Welcome to our next session on evolution and creation, our series where we've been looking at the Bible and science and seeing how the two integrate or not. And I'm joined today by our friends Meryl and Eva and Miriam and Monica. Why don't you tell us where you're from?
I'm from St. Mary and St. Athanasius Church in Mississauga.
I'm also from the same church. St. Mary and St. Athanasius in Mississauga.
Likewise.
Okay, so all four of you from Mississauga here in Ontario. Fantastic. Well, welcome. My name is Don Waller, and I'm your host for these sessions. I'm an apologist with Reasons to Believe, a science and faith organization that tries to integrate science and faith issues and explore the harmony between them. So we've been looking at Genesis chapter 1 and comparing that with what science has to say about the book of Genesis, the first chapter, and seeing is there any harmony at all. And in this session, we're going to tie everything together. In our last session, we got up to day 6, where we examined the creation of man as God's ultimate creation. Having prepared the planet in the previous 5 days, he then brings advanced life and mankind onto the scene. And science, of course, when they look at the evolution, as they would say, of planet Earth, they would say, yeah, that order and the way, the sequence that Genesis seems to describe is exactly the same order. And so Genesis and nature's record agree that man, being an utterly unique being, was last to appear on the scene on planet Earth. Well, so what happens next? If that was day 6, what happens after day 6? Well, where I went to school, it's day 7. Okay? And we read in Genesis chapter 1, starting at chapter 2, starting at verse 1, we read that, thus the heavens and the earth were completed in all their vast array. And by the 7th day, God had finished the work he had been doing. So on the 7th day, he rested from all his work. And God blessed the 7th day and made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. Now, it's very important to notice something here. A lot of people think that God, when it says that he rested, he went on holiday. And that was it. He didn't have anything more to do with the earth or the universe. It doesn't say that God rested from activity. It says that he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. And there's a big difference. Okay? The word creating in this section of talking about day 7 is again the word bara. And again, there's nothing new or unique being created. So at this point, what God is saying to us in Genesis is that he stopped making brand new things, right? Because we've talked about how the Hebrew word bara speaks about something new coming into existence that did not previously exist. So if that's the case, then God says, I'm going to stop creating, I'm going to stop baraing. What is that? What would we expect to see? Well, we'd expect to see no more new things, right? Now you'll notice something about the 7th day, that it has no end. It doesn't say there was evening and morning in the 7th, it just says the 7th day. All right, well, let's look at the record of nature and see what it has to say to this. Well, the startling fact is that since man appeared on earth, there has been nothing new, significant added to the planet. Ever since we arrived, there's been no new creatures arriving. You don't see new creatures coming into existence. Now, we might discover new creatures. In fact, they just did the other day. They discovered a new creature, but they know that that creature had been pre-existing. Moreover, rather than a planet bursting with creativity, we actually see the reverse happening. We see more and more and more species going extinct, ceasing to exist, and going out of existence, right? That seems to be the pattern that we're seeing, as opposed to the reverse, which is all kinds of new species coming into existence. Now that's a particular challenge for if you look at it purely from a naturalistic, evolutionary perspective, how do we explain the fact that there are no new species coming into existence? Well, the argument would be, well, we don't have enough time. We're just here for this short period of time. Okay, fair enough. But it does seem to accord with what the Bible says, that if God had stopped creating, we wouldn't see any more new creatures coming onto the face of the earth either. And so, at the minimum, what we can say is that Genesis and science agree that ever since man arrived, there's been nothing new under the sun. That much we can agree on. We might differ on the reasons for that, but at least we can agree that that's what we see. All right, so I want to just bring some conclusions here to our sessions together, and then we're going to take some questions. So the first one we want to say is that Genesis, as I've said before, is not intended to be a science textbook, but God's record and the record of nature do seem to be in harmony. We don't see one saying something and the other saying, no, that's not at all the way it happened. It's not, you got the order wrong or whatever. It seems to be very much in harmony. The second thing is that the writer of Genesis, whoever that was, who lived thousands of years ago, nailed the order of events perfectly. And this order of events is one that we've only recently discovered. Scientists have only recently understood that this is the order in which creation took place, or that the earth came to be where it is. Now, what do you think the odds are of guessing the 13 events that are recorded in Genesis chapter 1 and getting the sequence absolutely right? You guys are in high school, you should know the answer to that. So what's the chance if you have 13 different things and you have to guess them all in the right order? What's the mathematical answer for that question? Well, I won't put you on the spot. The answer is 13 factorial. Okay, does anybody know what 13 factorial is? 13 times 12 times 11 times 10 times 9 times 8, all the way down to 1, right? And that number, incidentally, is 6.227 billion. So in other words, the odds of this ancient writer of Genesis recording the 13 events of creation and getting them in the right order, never mind the right thing, but getting them in the right order, is one chance in 6.227 billion. That's pretty big, pretty small odds. It's a pretty big number, pretty small odds, right? So that speaks to us about, wow, how is that possible that some writer in some ancient text could get that right? The third conclusion that we can reach, having looked at this, is that we have a planet that appears to have been made just for us. It seems to be uniquely designed for human life. And lastly, I think we can conclude that science and the Bible reveal a remarkable harmony. The one is not a mythological text, with fantastical stories of how creation occurred. It's actually quite accurate in its description of the events that scientists tell us occurred from the beginning of time right up until today. So thanks very much for your attention and participation. Now we're going to have some questions, and I'm sure you're brimming with questions. Any question from anything we've discussed in this series so far is fair game. So who'd like to start?
How do we know about this Cambrian explosion, and what's the proof for it?
Okay, the Cambrian explosion. How do we know about it, and what kind of proof do we have that this happened 543 million years ago? That's a pretty accurate number, by the way. And it's an accurate number because of the dating of the rocks in which they found all the fossils. So the short answer to your question is that we have a huge amount of fossil evidence for the Cambrian explosion. And what's really cool is one of the largest deposits of those fossils is, guess where? Right here in Canada, in a famous area known as the Burgess Shale, which is in British Columbia. And in fact, there's a group of people going out there just this summer. They're taking like a field trip from the organization that I work with, Reasons to Believe. They're going to be going out there and looking at a lot of those fossils and doing a field trip for people that are interested. And so I think the other large deposit is in China. But basically, Canada, right here in Canada, is home to one of the largest deposits of the Cambrian fossils. And so we can literally see it with our very eyes. You can see all these different kinds of animals, many, many different kinds of animals. Detailed structures are visible in the fossil record. And the dating of those rocks has been dated with a variety of different techniques to take us to that period. It's probably plus or minus 1 million years. Now that sounds like a lot of time, but when you look at it in the space of the overall timeline from since the creation of the universe through to the creation of planet Earth and how long Earth has been around, which is billions of years, and we find out that really it's just like a snap in time. It's not long at all. And that's why biologists really struggle with the Cambrian explosion, because if we look at it from a naturalistic perspective, and that says that all of these animals essentially evolved slowly over time, they adapted and changed slowly over time, then that's what we would expect to see in the fossil record. We'd expect to see slow, gradual changes over time. But that's not what we see. What we see in the fossil record are these virtually instantaneous appearance of these animals, especially in the Cambrian, but not only in the Cambrian explosion. And so it defies the understanding from a naturalistic perspective of how could that be? Why so many, so incredibly new, all seeming to happen at the same time? And as I said in our session on that, it set the stage for many body forms of animals that would continue from there. And so it seems as though this is a record of God's intense creative activity, not the only one, but one of those records of his intense creative activity if we look at it from a creation perspective. And all I would say is which one makes more sense? The scientific record doesn't seem to support a gradual appearance. It seems as though it's more of a fantastic appearance. Now, some scientists call this punctuated equilibrium. Stephen Jay Gould, a famous paleobiologist, he coined the term punctuated equilibrium, talking about how evolution kind of goes along and then it's punctuated with periods where nothing happens and then all of a sudden there's a lot of activity. He didn't really explain how that happened, but basically that's what we see in the fossil record. We would argue that that's God's creative activity when we see those bursts of occurring in the fossil record.
Why is it that we have DNA similar to other animals?
Oh, that's a great question. So I guess, remember we talked about how God created man as a unique bara creation, but it also says that he made him, the Hebrew word asa. He manufactured man using stuff, okay? And what's interesting is that he used the same stuff to make us as he did to make a lot of other things in the animal and plant world. I'm a biochemist, so I can tell you a lot of details around that, but it might interest you to know that if you take our DNA and you isolate it and purify it and examine it, about 33% of our DNA is identical to a daffodil. It's identical, okay? Now, why would that be? Well, because a lot of what our DNA does is it codes for proteins or enzymes that drive a lot of biological function. And in our cells, we have a number of metabolic processes that take place. You may have heard of the Krebs cycle, okay? And in the Krebs cycle, there's a bunch of different molecules that basically go around and around and around in a cycle. And that cycle exists in many different cells, both in the plant world and in the animal world, and it's identical. So if you're an engineer and you're building something and you've got a piece over here that works really well, why not use it or adapt it and use it over here to do the same thing? And so it appears as though God did that. He said, all right, I'm going to set up basically a metabolic system, and I'm going to use it in plants, and I'm going to use it in animals, and I'll use it in humans as well. And that means I have to use the same pieces of DNA to do that. Now, that's a daffodil. What about something that looks more like a human, like a chimpanzee? But 98%. It's changing, the numbers vary. It depends on which report you read, but let's say 98% of their DNA is the same as ours. The question isn't how much is the same, but what about the 2% that's different? And it seems as though that 2% scientists are focusing on, and they're finding out that this seems to be what makes human beings unique in many, many ways. It gives us higher cognitive abilities. It gives us a lot of what would allow us to have a relationship with God and be a unique creation. And so whilst we share this DNA, we have similarities, there are these key differences. And so it doesn't necessarily mean that the one came from the other. You can also look at it from a design perspective and say, well, the same engineer that designed this designed that over there. Okay, one last question. Who would like to ask that one? Eva.
Okay. So I know that this world, like it said that this world could survive on its own without humans here. So why would we have a world that's perfectly fit for us if all we do is destroy it?
Wow. Well, that's a big question. I think that if we look at let's look at a biblical answer for that first. The biblical answer is that it seems as though God created this world, as you say, as a temporary home for us, not a permanent home. And you have to look at other parts of the Bible to see that, right? If we look at the scientific record, we see that yeah, this world is winding down. It might interest you to know that the universe as a whole, as it expands, is continuing to cool. And eventually, in about 50 billion years, is going to be a cold, dead, dark place. Will there be no life anywhere? The moon is moving away from the Earth slowly, about 2 centimeters per year, which is changing the rotation rate of the Earth. We're going to talk about this in another session. Eventually, the Earth is going to slow down and die. So it's clear that this Earth is a temporary place. Why we're here now is because it's the perfect time to have life in the universe on one planet. So I think it's a great question, but I think it speaks more about why we're here than it does about the science necessarily. It's a window in time for God to do what He wants to do in us. Okay, thanks very much. Great questions. We'll see you next session.